His first galleries. It was when it's done contemporary now, but Lisa and Callie Dunn was then done in Brown, and so now Lisa is an independent curator and art advisor, and Callie Dunn now has done contemporary. But this is sort of the beginnings of Trenton's career,
Undergrad.
his undergrad years, even at what is now Texas A&M at Commerce, but was then Eastern Texas State University at Commerce. So Lisa would know the origins of a lot of the very, very early work up until probably the beginnings or through the Mound period, I would say. So this is our docent group, our fact team. And we'll just mill around, I guess, and talk about the larger scopes of the exhibition in terms of the sections and how we've attempted to organize. A lot of these things will morph one into the other quite easily. But let's see, it was back in 2012 when I was working on Radical Presence that Trenton and I started talking about the possibility of doing a show together and really wanting to tap an area of his practice that really had gone really somewhat unexplored in any kind of intensive or comprehensive way. And one of the things that I was very keen on was understanding the sort of elements of his drawing practice and how that, which seemed to be consistent in all of the things that he's been doing from childhood to the present, how that really kind of filtered into the work and how he really thought of drawing as a practice, how elastic he saw it was, and how he sought to look at that elasticity throughout the work. So I would say the earliest section in the work is called the academic section. There are 5, I should start with that. There are 5 sections: academic, moundish, then we have liminality or the liminal room. We have self-portraiture, which is from the mirror, and then we have a series of studies, which are sprinkled in this section and in the moundish section. But they're all studies for either artist books or public commissions he's done in Seattle or here in Houston or in Dallas at the Cowboy Stadium, which is now the AT&T Stadium, I believe is the title of it. So we can kind of go back. So Lisa, whenever you're ready.
Yes, you keep on going,
Okay.
and we'll join you in a minute.
Okay.
We've got to look at a few more videos.
Yes, okay. All right. So let's go over here to academic. And an epidemic is not only, epidemic is the actual title of a cartoon series he did for the newspaper, the student newspaper in Commerce, the Texas State University. There were some proto works of Epidemic, which are untitled, but for the most part, Epidemic kind of sort of consolidated his own ideas and practices as he thought initially he wanted to go into doing cartooning and graphic work. But then later, once he was at Eastern State University, meeting with Lee Baxter Davis, who figures largely into his own development as an artist, and also in the development of other artists which Trent really became to celebrate, you know, like Gary Panter, also went through Eastern Texas State University, ETSU, and studied under Lee Baxter Davis. Robin O'Neill also went through that university. So Lee Baxter Davis plays a very large role in sort of understanding graphic drawing itself as art, it's conceptual, you know. It doesn't have to follow anything very specific. It can be its own thing. It is an art form in and of itself, and that you could utilize drawing any way that you would use painting. It doesn't have to be meant just primarily for illustrative, that you can infuse that with a certain mythology. And I think that really comes through in Trenton's work, the subsequent works that come about. And then also when you look at the works of Gary Panter and Robin O'Neill, you see that figures prominently, the sort of notion of mythology and how it plays a role in how the practice of drawing plays a role in celebrating mythology in that way. So Epidemic is what Trenton did in undergraduate school. And you see that the series ran in the, I would say, 95, 96, a lot of these works. And then there are proto works to that. We have some of his very early childhood drawings, which were from 84, 87. And then this is when he gets into, he went to Paris Junior College before he went to Eastern Texas State University. And there he'd already started taking foundational courses in drawing. This was one such where he was asked to mimic a certain drawing and sort of convert that into with his own hand. And then he decided to insert himself into that same drawing. So this is called The Desecration of the Golfer's Home. And it was, as it was initially presented, that he sort of recreated and then inserting himself in that. And then you could see how he's already shifted a bit of the mythology in terms of, you know, these golfers are suddenly like aliens. You know, he sort of already begins to infuse something. It's not just pure mimicry, but he begins to infuse it with his own sense of narrative and his own sense of mythology comes through. And then these are elements of the Epidemic series. And then this is a series that he started post-epidemic. He thought, I think I might want to start a graphic novel. And he started this concept of the switch. But these are the only two pages that exist from that. And when he started really thinking about an idea of mythology, this is sort of a really important transitional piece, which he calls I Hugged an Icy Aquatic Figure and then Set Adrift on Memory's Bliss. They're two separate works, but he really conceived of them as a sort of trilogy. You know, these are the two that exist. But he initially, before the mound came into being, he started looking for alter egos for his persona. Now, he wanted to talk about things that were near and dear to his heart, things that coming out of Paris, Texas, coming out of a situation where there were, you know, social issues that really, I mean, he felt like as a young kid, he rarely expressed himself verbally or physically, that all existed within his head. And then when you layer onto that issues of sort of racial tensions that existed in a small town in Texas, he started looking for alter egos to talk about certain things that really affected him. And the first alter ego was the penguin. And so eventually this penguin morphs into the mound, but we can talk about that more later. But this was the prototype to the mound. The notion that, oh, it's black and white, so it talks about the division, this sort of, issue, the binary of black and white racial relations, and the penguin being sort of a stand-in for that, but also talking about, and he sort of discusses this when he talks about the mound. He wanted the mound to be black and white to sort of represent prison fur, prison gauze, prison wear, but you know, it's layered, it's multi-layered in terms of the narratives that come through with that. But so the prototype for the mound initially is the penguin, so that's why it's here. So he wanted to conflate a sort of way of working with even what he's doing now. So sort of coming back full circle with the epidemic is a 2014 work that is just now completed and being used in this exhibition, which is a series called Step and Screw. So he's taking those same ideas that he was initially exploring very early on in his work and coalesces it with all of the knowledge and practices that he's developed over the past 20 plus years, and infuses it with this 30-part series called Step and Screw. And it's wonderful because it conflates several different narratives together. It is still about race relations. It's still about, you know, the issues. I mean, Paris, Texas is interesting because it was a site of lynchings as well. So, I mean, it has its own histories there, some of which, you know, time and issues have sort of developed and shifted. But there are some issues that remain the same in terms of how some people see the world. But this is very interesting in the sense that it goes back to issues of Philip Eston and the notions of what happened both personally and politically. What happens both personally and politically. So there are a couple of narratives. There's his own personal narrative, of his family, and history of Philip Guston, the history of flight and the development of the helicopter. All of these, elements. And so there are all of these different narratives that get played out in terms of these various narratives that sort of coalesce and then they diverge and then diverge and then converge together in terms of the history of his family, the invention of the helicopter, which comes back to figure into the narrative around Philip Guston, to the issues of, life in Paris, Texas, an idea of lynching, the Ku Klux Klan, which also figures prominently in Philip Guston's work, the light bulb, which also figures, and then it goes into Guston's own personal history of why certain iconography is repeated over and over again into his own drawings, the figure of the hooded figure, the light bulb, the rope, all of those things come out of personal narratives that happen in Philip Guston's life itself. But knowing that notion of the iconic imagery of the hooded figure, you see if you turn just pivot, you see this piece called Judgment No. 2, which also deals with this notion of the hooded figure, also ideas about lynching. Also, it starts to give insight into a few characters that will resurface throughout Trenton's narrative around the mound, which is Lloyd. Lloyd is a sort of spiritual entity, a spirit entity, not spiritual, spirit entity, which wants to rob the world of color. He wants to tell people that they deserve less, that they're not worthy. And so therein lies that sort of figure of, suppression, a figure of, it already sort of starts this sort of binary between good and evil, this sort of narrative between good and evil, because the opposing entity to Lloyd is color, who wants to bring, color and beauty into the world. So there are these two opposing forces. The narrative really begins, and Torpedo Boy also plays a role in that, which is highly figured in this series. It is Trenton himself, or a character very much like Trenton, who gets a phone call about the need for something to happen in a house. He then decides to become Torpedo Boy to go out on this job, and Torpedo Boy is the one who then encounters the Klan in this particular narrative. So that sets up, again, these characters, Lloyd, Torpedo Boy, and then you turn to, which is the second section, which I don't even think I mentioned when I was listing them all, which was the studio floor. It is actually the second section. So there's Epidemic, and then Torpedo Boy, then Moundish, then From the Mirror, and then the liminal room. But Torpedo Boy is what's highlighted here, and again, he sort of serves, the mound serves as an alter ego, but also Torpedo Boy serves as an alter ego. So there, again, this is multi-layered, and in some cases it gets a little confusing as to who actually is who, but there's a whole narrative about the studio floor here, and it is about Torpedo Boy, and this is the first series. The reason why the series is here, and it has its own area and section, is because it was the first time that Trenton realized that he could actually conflate or bring this idea of cartoon and narration into a larger, like a seriality, and still, and it doesn't have to be a graphic novel. It doesn't have to be a cartoon. It actually can be a multifaceted or multi-part work of art that has a sense of seriality to it. And so it becomes an important catalyst in him understanding these sort of epic narratives and how they can play out, but also that he doesn't have to leave his love of cartooning and graphic, behind, and he could actually bring it into the world, the art world, quote unquote art world, quotation marks. So this series is important in that it sets up the narrative, but it also sets up his being allowed, his allowing himself to understand seriality doesn't have to exist in one faction of the art world, and it could actually be brought into, this other wider arts landscape. And this sets up the notion of, Torpedo Boy and the vegans as being the protagonist, although it is Torpedo Boy who becomes the aggressor in the series. He is the one who he goes out in search of the vegans and their sacred space, and then he antagonizes them by stealing their tofu. So, they're fun, it's a real fun show, but it has its critical moments, but the narratives are layered and they're extensive and they go out onto the various tangents. But in this instance, we start to learn about the vegans in a way. And I was trying to see, they don't appear in this. So this is kind of the first time that the vegans also start to appear in the narratives. So yes, he goes into the sewer. He steals the tofu. He sees them having their sacred dinner. He steals their tofu, and then he runs back up to the world above the sewer. And then he encounters, the whole 1 through 5 is all about his stealing the tofu. And then 6 through 10 is about how he's utilizing his tofu to get laid. Okay, so, he's got the tofu, he's chowed down on it, and then he sees Tootie. And so he decides, who's a prostitute, and he decides that he's going to pay her in tofu for her services. So this is sort of what happens, and he's got a kind of wicked sense of what pleases him. So there are all sorts of things that he uses or wants to utilize in being pleasured. And so that the story sort of ends at that point where he gives her 2 tofus in order to be serviced. And the narrative itself exists right here on the wall, 1 through 5 and then 6 through 10. So he gives you the whole sort of detail of what he wants done, how he wants it done, the whole 9 yards. So for those who like to read, unless they're into, scatological play, it's probably, you might want to stop and write at number 6. And then it goes all the way around to number 10 actually being on the back wall. So people can come all the way around and then all the way on the back. So back of the shack. So if we roll into what becomes the third section, which is Moundish, it roughly starts in the late 1990s, 98, 99, and rolls forward for approximately 10 years. He works intensively in this narrative. There are 3 very large works, and Trigger was also trying to determine how he can turn mark making into painting and vice versa. So these very large pieces were drawn when Trigger was at the Corps. He left East Texas State University and was accepted into Temple in Philadelphia. And after he came out of graduate school, he was accepted into the Corps program, which is when I met him, roughly around 2000. And he did a series of these works where he really wanted to emerge out of the sort of use of doing the graphic work or the pencil work and looking at how to make paintings. He wanted to work on canvas. And so he wanted to stay within a realm that he knew very well, that he felt he didn't want to just start picking up a brush and painting. He knew he was an incredible draftsman, and he knew that he could begin to layer things and collage things. And so he made that painting just using mark making, just using words. And this is one of the earliest works that he did in that fashion called Friends Indeed. So you can see it's all completely compiled, very much like the You Deserve Less. You see that a lot with the works on paper. Then he brings that whole practice onto canvas. And there are 3 pieces here, By and By, which is also a piece done well at the core. And you can see here again, paid, some of which that one is actually stretched. He did mostly loose works, and then he began stretching them later. He was looking for that sort of balance between what constitutes a painting. And here you see him both adding and, extracting, parts of the canvas where you're fixing it, extracting it again, and utilizing, this is primarily canvas, but there's paper on top of it. There's also other, the penguin again reemerges. So, you'll see these figures sort of pop up again, all sorts of woodland creatures, because the mounds, and I'll go into the history of the mounds. This is, By and By is the death of mound number 1, which is, here's another big one over here. So, but yeah, there are all sorts of woodland creatures, and then there's an octopus, and then there's a gator, and all of these things that would inhabit the world in different ways. A lobster, which comes into the woods to mourn the death of number 1. And then Vegans Have Fun is another piece over here. Again, utilizing mark making primarily. So, but to tell you about the epic story about mounds, come over on this side. And again, this is a long story. Go quite to, I think, Oscar, did you make copies of the handbook? The Truth and Oil Hancock handbook?
We scanned it.
Yes.
And we scanned it, and it still needs to be edited down.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, the handbook,
but we'll share it soon.
Okay, the handbook, there are 2 books. One, the handbook, and the Me and Mound book really massage and tell you the epic history about how the mounds came into being. But just to give you a condensed version, is that this is father, Homer Buctus, and Homer has his family, and then he goes out into the fields foraging for food for his family, and he comes across a field of beautiful flowers. And he is so in love with this field of beautiful flowers, it moves him so much that he begins to pleasure himself. And in pleasuring himself, the seeds which emerge from that moment fall onto the flowers, and he leaves. And he comes back to this place again, and he realizes that from his seed in this field of flowers have emerged these mounds. So he becomes the father of the mounds, okay? And he realizes that if he does pleasure himself again, his seed sprouts more mounds. And so before you know it, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of mounds. And if you turn around, there's this one piece called Fresher Fields, and it gives you a sense of how he just created all of these. There's just a massive population of mounds. Well, now his own son and daughter are so upset when they found out their father's secret, that, he has created this other family other than theirs, that they go out and they decide to wreak havoc and kill these mounds, okay? And they go through the fields, the beautiful fields, and and here they acknowledge that the mounds are their father's, child, but then when they realize that there are thousands of them, they take matters into their own hands and they seek to kill them all. And so here's the beginning of the massacre, and then there's this sibling rivalry where the 2 of them are always fighting one with the other. But once their father realizes what they've done, he cries out, the earth opens up, swallows the son and the daughter down into the earth. And then they, being alone in the middle of nowhere by themselves, procreate, and their offsprings become the vegans, okay, who are still hell-bent on terrorizing and killing off the mounds. So that gives you this sort of like condensed version. I know, it's crazy, but it is sprung all from the world of Trenton. So then the forces that exist are, again, Lloyd and color. So those are the larger forces, of good and evil. And then Torpedo Boy is charged. Torpedo emerges into this because he's charged with protecting the mounds. So there are these two entities, and then there's the mortal torpedo boy, who is charged with protecting the mounds, and then there are all the vegans who want to prey upon the mounds. And they want to prey upon them not to only kill them, but they want them for their meat, which is called mound meat. And they convert that mound meat into tofu, which is what they love to eat. So it's this wonderful narrative, you know. And here Homabhaktas, understanding that his children were trying to kill off all the mounds, tries to pull them to safety. So he takes them from the field that they emerged from, the initial home that they had, and he sprinkles them throughout the forest so the vegans and the kids can't get back to them. Okay, so this is the sort of narrative that plays out in terms of the history, the beginning, the beautiful fields, the massacre, the continued massacre, and then the fighting between the brother and the sister, and then the father taking them away, the earth swallowing the kids up, and then the emergence of the vegans. So, and this narrative plays itself out. It elongates, he looks at the elasticity of it in terms of the stories, the tangents of the stories, the narratives, how he can present those narratives. He massages this for roughly 10 years. So a lot of what you'll see in most of this work that comes out of here are those narratives that continue to emerge out. You see here the vegans that exist in different ways, the mounds, which then start to procreate with other entities and creatures who also start to look differently. And then the mounds have souls to them. And part of the souls are the souls of these little children who are lost early. And they begin to inhabit the souls of the mound. So that's how they're sort of sprinkled throughout here. And where does he get these images from? He gets these images from they used to be on milk cartons, the sort of lost children. Now they come in circulars and the circular Sunday pages where you get these cards with these lost children. So a lot of his sketchbooks will have, you know, cutouts of the images of these children, and he will draw them, and they become the souls of the mounds. So the mounds are innocents, basically, and then these are all just sort of like a sprinkling of all of the mounds. There's Wow, That's Mean. There's the mound head up here. There's number 1, Lloyd in Danger, who is then later moored in the By and By painting. Torpedo Boy. This is sort of like a mixture of things that, and this is fairly early in terms of the mound narrative. There are a couple of exceptions to this, which are these two. This is the most recent, which actually is the image that we've overlaid our logo for the show on top of. So this image is brand new. This is from 2014. But most other these are fairly 2000, 2005-ish. So, and again, the show is roughly chronological in each of its sections. And so as things play out, you see they become, these are the miracle machines, which start to emerge in the late, 2007, 2008-ish. He started, it's 2006, 2007, he starts working on the ballet. He gets a commission from what is now the Austin Museum of Art. It was back then Art House, I believe, maybe. Before then it was something else. And he is asked to work with Stephen Mills at the Ballet Austin and Grant Reynolds to pull together this ballet, all based upon the narrative of the mounds. And it's a beautiful ballet. It's one of the ideas we had when we started working on this show was to have Ballet Austin come to Houston and actually perform the ballet, which would have been magnificent. But that didn't happen. It just became too complicated in the scheduling and the money. But it would have told a story. It completely brings to life the history of these films in a way that, I mean, I'm telling you a narrative that was 10 years in developing, and they were able in an hour and a half to give you that whole, not even an hour and a half, hour and a couple minutes, give you that history through movement and stage design, and it was just really beautiful. If you have a chance, and maybe we could set up a link with Ballet Austin on our website to get little snippets of that. But these are, you know, again, the vegans converting the mound meat into tofu. And, you know, so they're ever at it. They're in the sewers. These are called miracle machines, which, you know, so what happens in the narrative, again, this narrative immerses over a course of, you know, 10 years, is that there are some vegans who then see the light. There's some vegans who realize that the mounds are not bad creatures, that they come to embrace light and color and the fact that beauty can exist in the world. They don't have to live in this black and white world, that they could have this extensive life of color. And so some of them are actually eat the tofu and eat the mound meat. They can't only eat it. They can't. Okay, so you have to convert the mound meat into tofu for the vegans who want to stay vegans. But there are people who will partake. There are vegans who will partake of the mound meat as is without any kind of conversion. It's an interesting narrative.
That's really funny to me too.
I know, I'm like drinking Kool-Aid. No, there are vegans who will pray before eating the mound meat because it can kill them. It's meat, basically. Vegans eating meat. Okay. So they'll pray and they'll meditate before eating the mound meat, and it enables them to see the color in the world. So therein lies Saint Sesson, who becomes one of the vegans who begins to celebrate the eating of mound meat, but only as a ritual, only as this ritualized practice, so that the vegans can have, in fact, color into their lives. So, and by partaking of the mound meat, they can actually create color. So this is another element of it where the mound meat is being utilized in a more ritualistic way. And they're called miracle machines. So this is a miracle machine. And then there are several other. This is the study of this miracle machine. So he actually created it in pen and ink first, and then created a larger painting from it. And the reason why I wanted to include paintings into the show is because so much of what he does, he never leaves the mark making behind. There's always these large components of drawing in the paintings themselves, and it's sometimes you really do see the mark making. A lot of the work, even though it is with acrylic, is with a fine point, and he utilizes it just as he would utilize a pencil, you know? So it is acrylic on canvas, but they're large components. And these landscapes will reappear, of course, in a lot of what he does. So that if people ask, you know, well, why are there drawings in it? I mean, why are there paintings in the drawing show? This is precisely why. Just as he left the idea of mark making in words as marks and drawing, you know, he's decided to go into painting, but still bringing the mark making in. It doesn't have to become text. Here, a lot of this is acrylic on paper, and again, you see these are around 2008, 2009, where he really is starting to convert a lot of these vegans, a lot of these color babies. You can see CB. Color babies are emerged when the vegans themselves go through the color machine, the miracle machines, and they spit out these colorful eggs that create these miracle, color babies. And so the color babies sort of exist as a strange hybrid between the vegans and the mounds. And so they'll go in and they'll, they're innocents as well. So they're not privy to the whole issues of what has happened in the past. They're just sort of their own entities, and they exist in this landscape, and they just sort of go through everyday life, without much ideas of good and evil. And you see partaking of mound meat and spewing color out the other end. So yeah, all of these histories start to come into play, and there's a conflation of a couple of, these are the Asa Lantern series here. You start seeing here, this is Saint Sessom's throne, the seat that he sits on. These are miracle machines that sort of, the tofu can convert into these sort of miracle machines. It's not converting the tofu into, the mound meat into tofu, but rather converting this into, converting them into beautiful color. Wow, this is too much. And then these landscapes, of course, figure prominently, the Asa lanterns. Hi, kitty kitty. What you doing? What are you doing? Let me see what you're doing. Were you nice to Miss Lisa? Ah. Here, you. Nice. I'm gonna owe you big time because this is not what you came here for. And so it goes into, and then a lot of the titles of these are really beautiful. You know, here, you know, a lot of these stay hidden or they will show you. This is roughly 2006. These other sort of images start to emerge because those vegans who then partake of mountain meat as a ritualistic practice are then preyed upon by the other vegans. So now they're good vegans and evil vegans that are fighting each other. So a lot of that history will come out of this as well. Cult of color, that begins with the ballet again, you know, the whole history of the vegans who are now in convents. And these are the colors. And you see once they start partaking of mountain meat, they start getting fleshy. So that's part of it too. You know, their bodies start changing. They start getting, instead of just bones, they actually have, you know, flesh under them now, once they partake of the mountain meat. So that's one way of distinguishing, you know, the good vegans from the evil vegans as well. And these cavescapes, these sort of foreign landscapes will really reemerge. Trenton starts to utilize them as these sort of backgrounds and foregrounds, but then they become entities in and of themselves. So when we look at the latter part of the liminal space, you'll find mostly primarily landscapes that exist there. These, you know, we created a section called Liminal, which is the fourth section of the exhibition, and these were sort of like non sequiturs. These were like things, some of them emerged as doodles, some of them emerged as works that were really, you know, ways of working and trying to get at something else. So they're sort of the in-between stuff. They're the stuff that doesn't fit into moundish, it's not different. And they're sort of, again, one-offs. They don't constitute bodies of work at all. So these are early liminal pieces that begin in 1998 and roughly go up to 2000. There's one 2012, which is the feline energy piece. But he's constantly doing doodles that, you know, again, they just sort of, they come out of the whole epidemic, the notion of creating cartoons, these sort of editorial cartoons where they're, you know, sort of one-offs, or, you know, he has a love of words and he has a love of vocabulary. And that also figures prominently into this other piece, which is a wallpaper. It's just called, it's a game that was online called Spelldown. And Trenton played Spelldown. And so these are actual pages taken from his sketches where he was actually writing out the words and writing how many points he was getting for each word. So if you come closely and look at it, you know, again, they're just taken from the sketchbooks. They're numbers, you know, the date, you know, the score, you know, high points and grades. You see some of them are the actual words he was using in the Spelldown. And this wallpaper is also brand new. The Graphic Workshop and Museum helped to fabricate these, and so they're not even available for commercial purchase yet. This is the prototype, the artist proof, if you will, that they made especially for the show, so it will travel with the show. So there are a couple of things that are hot off the press. There's the Shack, the Stephen series, this wallpaper, and the animation. This is again, it goes with moundish, and I placed it here for a couple of reasons. One, it sort of fits into this sort of mound wall, but then it also highlights Trenton's use of just whatever material is available. If you're actually able to stand here and look, you'll see from his portraiture section the use of cardboard. Also in this section, the use of cardboard as material. So kind of wanted to highlight that in this. Just come around this wall here, you can see the more recent works that we sort of put in the liminal space, and there generally tend to be these, not really studies that became things in and of themselves. You know, there's something called masterpiece-scapes, which are where the good vegans would go to hide out. There's sort of like, and that's morphed into their own sort of alien forms and alien landscapes. There are a lot of population. So you see from this, he's created these other sort of like fantastical landscapes that kind of informs the work and kind of goes back and forth. So he plays on these. What initially becomes a backdrop for the mound series starts to convert itself into something completely different. And these good beacons then become other characters that begin to play themselves out in a different way too. They sort of emerge away from the mound landscape. What happens roughly in 2010, he starts to think about his life, take stock of where he is, and he's thinking, well, I always used the mound or torpedo boys to stand in for myself. You know, I want to do away with those sort of alter egos, and I want to reconstruct myself into my own work. I want to be myself speaking. You know, so that's where then the self-portraiture comes in as a sort of fifth element for the exhibition. You see very, very early on self-portraiture, which is this is some very early work, very much around the time that he was doing the, you all right? Yeah. Okay, is it over here? Oh, it's right here, Lisa. Yeah. Very much around the time that he was actually doing the Epidemic series. He did this. This is called the Hancock Twins. This is another guy who was a photographer for the paper. And so his name was Hancock as well. So they did the Hancock Twins. And then a lot of Trenton's sketchbooks, which I don't think we did scan images of, will have things like his dreams. You know, things of his dreams, and so this is one of the dreamscapes from there. When he was an undergrad, he was a graduate school, no, undergraduate, excuse me. He was invited to go to Skowhegan, and this is sort of the narrative of him being at Skowhegan and being sad and sick in the middle of nowhere in Maine. And then these are some other sort of prototypes for alter egos, which were the sort of in, you know, as in Nick and so on and so forth. But these were things that he considered as self-portraits, Bubble-born, Bob, you know, Trenton in all of his glory, you know, meanwhile back at the mansion, or no, this one's called, I don't think this is Family Moment, thank you. For a while between graduate and undergraduate school, Trenton worked as a substitute teacher, and he also worked at Pizza Inn. So that's kind of one way where you see these sort of hardware boxes coming into play. These are doodles from when he was at work, and you know, once you start reading these, they're just, you can't stop them. Really sort of full of those. And then he goes to graduate school at Temple University in Philadelphia, and his own sort of responses to that, you know. This is one of my favorites, which is he had, you know, he said he brought a car to Philadelphia, he was constantly being terrorized, and so hence his moniker back to Philadelphia was F you Philadelphia. And then nobody told me grad school would look like this. Again, his relationship with Robin O'Neill. It looks very much like a Robin O'Neill drawing, but actually Trenton himself drew it in the likeness of Robin O'Neill, of course inserting himself into the whole piece. Here you see, of course, the emergence of the mounds and him, you know, revealing himself as being an alter, that being an alter ego. So the self-portrait here really starts to come into play. He is a drummer. He learned drumming as a kid. And I think that enables him to have his dexterity in terms of how he writes the sort of monumental wall drawings you see around you. There are lots of places, both on the wall and actually in the works themselves, where he's actually writing upside down, you know, and it is from this dexterity, you know, where he's not ambidextrous, but he's able to utilize both arms and both hands fairly, you know, equally, well, then you would be ambidextrous, so that's not true. You can't, but he's able to use his left hand. He's right-handed. Him as Torpedo Boy, and again, this sort of revelation of himself as both the mound, as Torpedo Boy, he sort of reveals that in the self-portraiture in asserting himself into those. So what's interesting about this wall as well is it goes from these sort of light pencil drawings to sort of these more darker, works, graphite and ink on paper. And he said with a lot of these, he never really considered the drawings as drawings in and of themselves, as artwork, or rather as doodles and drawings. And then he goes back in his work and starts to pull those things out and realizes, no, these are real strong standalone drawings. But this period in the 2010, 20 through 2012 here, he starts to really massage drawing as an art practice in and of itself, where he is really intentionally utilizing them in that way. Works on paper, again, the cavescapes, again, inserting himself as opposed to the mounds. All of these figures are self-examination. Oftentimes you see him, understanding his body and reconciling the issues, body image issues, and understanding there's a person inside trying to get out, that kind of thing. Morphing his body itself, morphing into something else. When they found me, I wasn't there. All of these sort of figures, one, and one, self-portrait with tongue. So he starts to, rather than utilizing alter egos, inserting himself, first as pure self-portraiture and then self as character. And so that sort of radiates all the way toward where we are now. So in terms of self-portraiture and pushing the boundaries of drawing, he created these pencil sets. We're moving toward larger, much longer animation. Right now, this is probably a minute and a couple of seconds. Pencil test of what he's doing now. You see again self-portraiture and how he morphs the self into character and then morphs back into self. So this is these are looped pieces. They're all the same piece that are running at different speeds on each wall. You see here, he opens the mouth, pulls the tongue out, draws the sort of fleshed out vegan creature, which is the good vegan, and then utilizes the tongue, to sort of like, shake himself loose, but then morphs into other things. So what's interesting about these morphings is that if you look at it in certain ways, I think there's a figure here where the eyes become stretched, the glasses become stretched, and that's one of the images of Torpedo Boy. So he's sort of revealing himself as all of these different characters that people have encountered throughout their time here. I think it's when he's actually chewing his hands. Stretches out is one of the images of Torpedo Boy. Okay. All right, so sprinkled throughout are then studies. And these are all, I should say, these are all the cells for what you just seen. These are the individual cells. So these are simple pencil tests. They're not the clean and crisp digital animation. He's waiting to get more and more cells together before he strings it along. The goal is to create a 10-minute piece. But these are, again, just pencil tests. So they're little, they're little primary. They're the pencil tests to it. And as the exhibition goes along, he'll be adding more and more cells to it. So you may walk in and it may be longer, it may shift a little differently, it may exist differently. Yes.
It says it's machine ink. Like that. What is that?
Well, these it means Xerox. These are Xerox. So these are not the original artwork. Yeah, we wanted to poke holes in them, so we didn't want the originals. These are the Cowboy Stadium in Dallas, AT&T Stadium. These are the studies for a large-scale piece that he did at the stadium. And that is still on view. I mean, it's in the Cowboy Stadium. This was for the Olympic Sculpture Park in Seattle. And this piece only existed for a couple of years. It's no longer there. But I think if you go online, you will actually see the actual piece as it existed. But these are some of the studies. Some of them found their way actually into the finalized piece, but some of them were just sort of initial ideas and concept and sketches for it. This is what I think people might ask more about, which are the studies for the tunnel that's now at Herman Park. And that will be a permanent installation. This is called Mound Town, Destination Mound Town. And it just was revealed earlier in March. So you can take the children's train at Herman Park and see this. And I think there's one family day which is scheduled that will actually have a shuttle that will take people from here to go to the train, to actually ride the train to see the installation. That's it. It is very cool. And we'll be going to the train after this, because this is our Saturday ritual. We've seen this piece sort of just emerge from, the crude shed that was there that you went through drywall up on the walls, to colored drywall, to the whole preparation process throughout. People were privy to that. The train just kept going through, so it's pretty easy. And then a couple of artist studies from artist books are up here. We have a couple downstairs. This is the first sort of monograph artist book that we did. It's called The Mound. And I think one of the beautiful things that it says this book is dedicated to Aunt Fan Fan and Uncle Al. Trent often credits Aunt Fan Fan, which was his mother's aunt, with not really teaching him to draw, but really encouraging him to draw. He said, the earliest memories I have are being on Aunt Fan Fan's floor and drawing. And she would give me paper, just mostly busy work to keep a toddler busy. But also, once she saw that he had a real propensity and a real imagination to really continue to encourage that. So he often dedicates a lot of his earliest, encouragement as an artist from his Aunt Fan Fan. We have a couple of these books downstairs, but they're primarily out of print. Picture Box, which did this, and the Trenton Doyle Hancock Handbook has gone out of business, so these things don't exist anymore. So if you want one, and they're downstairs, I would encourage you to get one. And then this is the handbook, which talks about all of the characters that exist in the whole Mound narrative, the whole epic Mound, who these characters are: Hummerbuckus, the father, the Dark Babies, Trudy Fluzzo, which is the prostitute, Torpedo Boy, Anthony, which is one of the vegans who are one of the earlier converts. There's Saint Sesame, and then there's a cast of disciples, if you will, that then go out and preach the gospel to their other vegans. So the handbook is really great for that. And then, of course, the wonderful ballet that Clinton was commissioned to not only bring these characters. This is Saint Sesame. So, and he exists exactly like that in the paintings. And this is what we were able to Clinton not only created all of the costumes, he also created the set designs, the thrones. This is Saint Sesame's bone bed, the other throne. So all of the characters are disciples for Saint Sesame as well.
Was that ballet on DVD or captured by any kind of?
It was captured. There are snippets of it on DVD. I don't think the entire piece is not on DVD though.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can go in and look at on Ballet Austin's website. We do have segments of it that's actually featured. Okay, I think that's it. I think you guys have questions. I feel like I just went and I don't know how much of it becomes. Lisa, I'm taking you to lunch. How much of it really, it takes a while for it all to sort of sink in. It's a very, very dense exhibit. And each section has a lot, each image has a lot in it. And, it's one of those things that you want to encourage people just sort of grade come back and look at it with some fresh eyes. I mean, it is as much a history of Trenton's sort of evolution and dexterity with using